Welcome to the Everymaker. My name is Nick, and today we're doing something about this sandpaper. I'm working on a portable sandpaper organizer cabinet with simple shelves and a handle so that I can sort my sandpaper rather than trying to find what I need out of a pile of some random drawer, because just like it's nearly impossible to find that tool you just had in your hand but put down somewhere, finding the right grit of sandpaper was an exercise in futility. Until now. I designed this project to be cut from one 2x4 foot sheet of 1/2 inch plywood and a couple sheets of 2x4 foot 1/4 inch plywood. I started by rough cutting the board, then it's off to dado land. A dado is just a fancy word for a groove cut into the face of a board that allows the edge of another board to fit. I'm using a regular saw blade as the dados are very narrow. So after the first cut, I move the fence over about 3/32 of an inch and make the second pass. How do I know how far over to move it? I tested it on a scrap board before I started. I leave the two sides connected while I cut my dados so that they line up perfectly when I cut the boards apart. Once all the dados were cut, I cleaned up one edge of the board on the saw. Then cut the sides down to the final width. Then it was time to cut the back, top, and bottom, and here's where I realized I screwed up. When I measured to cut the board to rough size, I didn't look at my plans and I measured the height of the boards, not the width of the two boards. That's why I have such a large cutoff from the sides, and I don't have enough material to cut both the back and the top and bottom from what I have left. Please folks, remember, measuring twice and cutting once isn't just a good idea, it's a really good idea. I set my fence to just over a foot and cut the back. Fortunately, I had a scrap I was able to cut the top and bottom out of as well. I want this box to be portable, so I created a handle for the top. I raised the blade all the way to help account for the curve of the blade. After I made the first cut, I stopped the saw, slid my board back in place, and put a mark on the fence. That way I could just stop whenever I hit that mark and knew I wouldn't go over my lines. Since the saw is curved, it left a little bit of material that I had to just cut with a handsaw. And then I cleaned up with a chisel. I cut the handles to their final length and marked the center point to drill my holes. I couldn't find a center punch, so I used what I had available, a screw. I clamped both boards together and drilled all the way through the first board and part of the way into the second. This would leave me with a spot for the dowel to sit in. In order to cut the back to the final length, I had to reference off the shoulders of the side. So I just set up a stop block, barely skimming the bottom of each side, and then cutting the back to its final height. Now all of these dados caused the plywood to warp ever so slightly, so I clamped it to my crosscut sled since I knew it was flat. I also put a small pencil mark between the dados so when I used my brad nailer, I wouldn't accidentally hit a dado. A little bit of glue, then the brad nails, and this was plenty strong. Once the back was secure, I added the bottom, scraping off as much of the glue running down the sides as I could so that I wouldn't have to try to clean it up later. The top was a little different since I had a handle going through it. I had to create a dado, or a box joint, or whatever you want to call it. Whatever it is, once I had a nice tight fit, I would rinse and repeat, or in this case, glue and then brad nails. The handle's going to use the same trick I did when building ladder ball. There will be a link in the top right corner and down below in the doobly-doo. I wanted the handle removable for reasons I'll explain later, so I measured the length of the dowel plus a little extra so it would stick out on one side by about 1 inch. I also cut a little dowel nub for the other side. Once again, I used my little blocks as a jig. A 1-inch hole holds the dowel, while a small through hole lines up my drill so I get a perfectly centered hole in the end of my dowel. 2 nuts jammed onto the end of this hanger bolt help me screw it into the end of the dowel. The little dowel nub gets a hole just smaller than the nut, and a smaller, deeper hole to account for the bolt. With a little persuasion, the nut fits in quite nicely. Oh, and I forgot to drill a hole for the bolt. Good thing my drill fit. Now that the main body is finished, it's time to cut all the drawers, or shelves, or stop making me name things. Once cut to width, I place the shelf into the slot and mark it for depth. I used a quick stop block jig to set the depth. I checked the first board to make sure that the stop block was set correctly, and then cut the rest of the boards out. There was something very satisfying about fitting all these boards in place. Though I did have a slight issue toward the top where it got a little tighter. A quick sand and the board fit much better. Now onto the fun part, the sanding. When I used a scrap board for the top and bottom, it was just a hair too short, so I sanded the sides at the top and bottom so it would match up and be flush. Then it was time to put all the sandpaper away. With as satisfying as putting all the boards in place were, it was nothing compared to finally putting away all of that sandpaper. The final touch. I took an old hacksaw blade, marked and pre-drilled holes. I used a couple washers as risers and screwed the blade down to the top. I'm really happy with the way this came out. I needed a solution for my sandpaper for such a long time, and this does so many things for me. Organizes all my sandpaper. I've got this nice open bay down here at the bottom so I can store packs of sandpaper or maybe those discs of sandpaper. I have this little hacksaw blade here across the top so I can take a piece of sandpaper, put it right underneath, and tear off exactly how much I need, which is fantastic. Now this handle is not just a handle, it actually serves a couple different purposes. You can also put rolls of sandpaper, or if you're feeling real crazy, rolls of tape on here. They sell these rolls of sandpaper for a lathe, and they come in like 25-foot rolls that are about 1 inch wide. And you can put them on here, run them right underneath your hacksaw blade, and tear off small little chunks at a time. That way you're using only what you need to do your project. So I would love to get your guys' feedback on this project. This is going to be perfect for my shop and help reduce a little bit of that clutter that is sandpaper, because that stuff is everywhere. Hit that like button if you like this video. I am active on Instagram as well as Twitter and Facebook, so I'd love to see you guys over there. I'll leave links down below in the doobly-doo, and I'll see you guys real soon on the next project.